Good to see everybody here for this. My name is Robert Parker. I'm from MicaSense, and I'll be talking to you today about drones in agriculture, and specifically our sensors and what they do for agricultural operations, and how they could potentially help maybe some of you guys out and answer questions that you guys have. And hopefully this will be a useful discussion for you guys and a useful presentation for you. So without further ado, let's get started. So at MicaSense, we design sensors. We design sensors for precision agriculture. So let's see, my jacket's changing the pages for me here, but we've got the MicaSense Red Edge. Red Edge has been a standard multispectral sensor in the industry for a long time now. And we've just released a new sensor called Altom. And Altom brings with it higher resolution as well as thermal data, heat data as well. So these are the two sensors we have. And I've got them up here, and I can have you guys look at them if you want as well. But our sensors were designed specifically for agriculture. We don't really get into other industries or anything like that. They were designed to look at plants and plant reflectance and precision agriculture. And you can do a lot of good things with that. So the obvious goal with this is to do some crop health analysis as well as a lot of other things. And we'll get into those examples as I go here. But to talk about that, I just kind of want to talk about how our cameras are designed. This is the only graph I'm going to show. It won't get too much more technical than this. Beyond this, I'm going to just tell some stories. But so what we have here is our sensors are looking at different wavelengths of light. So the Red Edge, for example, the Red Edge M that you see here, the Red Edge MX, looks at these wavelengths of light: blue, green, red edge, which is invisible to our eyes, as well as near-infrared light, which is also invisible to our eyes. So what we see is that plants, so if you look at this graph, what it's showing is you how much light is being reflected off the plant's leaves, basically. So not much blue, and then you see this little bump in green, which is kind of obvious because plants look green to us, so they're reflecting a lot more green light. And then you have, when the plants are healthy, the green line is the healthy plant, you see a dip. They don't reflect a lot of reds and yellows or anything like that. And then all of a sudden you see, boom, they're reflecting a ton more near-infrared light. So you see a stressed plant, though, is reflecting a little bit more reds and yellows, which makes sense. If we look out here in the fall now, we can see the reds and yellows. That's obvious to us. We can see that the plants are stressed. So what's happening in the invisible light is also interesting as well. There's this little section here, which we call Red Edge, which is showing us that there can be differences in stressed and healthy plants, which we can take advantage of. Even though our eyes can't see it, a lot of times this difference that you see here happens way earlier than the difference that you see here. So you can detect stress really early on before it becomes visible to the naked eye. And then up in the near-infrared, there are some differences that happen as well, and sometimes those differences get extreme. And a lot of precision agriculture takes advantage of that. So this is what we base our sensors on, is these wavelengths of light, and that's why it's totally focused on agriculture, 100%. So I've got a lot of examples to share with you and how this can help with things like pests and disease and things like that, optimal crop harvesting, a lot of different things. And so just to start, I'll start with one story about managing weeds in a cherry orchard. And this one comes to us from a user in Chile. So they're kind of in central Chile down there at the bottom in a wine growing region. And the basic idea is that the service provider flew over the fields for their client multiple times during 3 weeks. So they collected about 3 weeks of data. They're flying over and they're creating these maps of the area. And you kind of see an example of that here. And they use these different indices. They do math on the data that they've collected. So you can see differences in leaf area, leaf coverage, and stuff like that. And you can see differences in the amount of chlorophyll that's in the plant. That's what we're getting at with the yellowing there, with the red and yellows that you see. You can kind of make maps of that, which plants have less chlorophyll than others. So using that idea, They were able to identify weeds in the field because you can see clearly the rows, and you can see in between the rows, and you can see where there are plants in between the rows. And so they used some sort of herbicide to control those weeds. They sprayed it in those areas to see what they could do to control those weeds. And then they found that the next time they flew, in week 2, that the weeds were still there. And so they considered, that maybe they needed to apply more herbicide to that, and this glyphosate in this case. And so when they actually studied it, though, they looked at a layer that shows the chlorophyll amount, and they decided that actually it was actually hurting the weeds and reducing the weeds, because they had really reduced in chlorophyll since being treated. So they found that there was no need to apply more herbicide, and then sure enough, in the week 3, the weeds were gone. So they were able to save on herbicide cost overall just by analyzing the data that the coverage that they got to see the effectiveness of what they'd done already. So that's just one story. And before we go on, I kind of want to switch to a few more stories. Actually, let me start with this. Let me go through the process here with you a little bit. The basic idea, and we'll go into this in more detail, is that you're gonna put one of these cameras on some kind of aircraft, whether it's a fixed wing, and we've got Todd here from Blue Skies Drone Rental, who's brought a number of different drones for you to check out, and he's going to talk about those and integrations and stuff like that in more detail. But the basic idea is to figure out some way to get this on an aircraft of some kind, along with its light sensor, which usually goes on top of the aircraft and looks upward at the incoming light. Because that was one thing I forgot to point out, is that when you've got this graph here, we have a sensor that looks down at the ground, right? This is kind of what we're taking pictures of, and it's measuring the amount of reflected light that's coming back. Well, the only way you know the amount of reflected light that's going to hit that camera is if you know the amount of incoming light and what that is. And so that's what this sensor is designed for. This sensor tells you how much light is coming in from the top. If it's cloudy or if it's sunny or something like that, the amount of light that's going to be coming down to the Earth is going to be impacted by all sorts of different conditions. So this measures that and tells you, now you have a percentage. Now you can say, well, 50% of the light is being reflected back, or 10% of the light is being reflected back. So that's what this tells you. So going back to where we were, the process is basically putting that stuff on the aircraft, and then the idea is to fly and collect overlapping images. So like, let's say this area where you're seated is the crop that we want to fly over. We'd fly the mission. We'd be up maybe 400 feet or so, and we'd be flying over that row, and then we'd turn and we'd fly in the middle, and then we'd turn and fly on this end, and then we'd stitch all of those pictures together. It'd be taking pictures, picture, 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 and it would stitch all of that together into one map. And then that would be your map that you could use, and you could do all sorts of calculations on that. So that's the third step, is processing that data into the map. And then the fourth step is to analyze all that data. And there's all sorts of calculations that can be done, and a lot of researchers have figured out a lot of great things that can show you a lot of details that you would otherwise not know about without it. All right, so let's talk about that a little bit more in depth. I'm going to pull up this here, give you a little bit more info. Okay, so using this in an agricultural context, what does it all mean? There's a lot going into agriculture here, that more than just flying a drone or everything. There's a lot of stuff to consider. There's the climate and where you are, the location. This data can only tell you so much. It takes kind of a trained agronomist as well to kind of interpret the data, or sometimes it might even take, in some cases, targeted scouting, where you see a problem in the data, and then you can go scout that specific place out of hundreds of acres or so, and you can kind of identify what the problem might be. You might not be getting a lot of details. It might just be saying, all right, there's a problem here, but it might not tell you the nature of that problem until you go inspect it. But you've got all these things to consider: the soil, the terrain that you're working with, your management practices, are you irrigating, pruning, thinning, all these things to consider in the agricultural context. Obviously, water is the biggest factor there. But then when you bring a drone into this picture, you have all sorts of other things to think about. So what's your flight time, what your mission plan is going to be, the kind of sensor that you want to use to look at your field, and how to integrate it and all that stuff that I talked about. So there are three main sensors that are used in agricultural drone sensing. Those are the multispectral sensors. Those are the ones that look at different wavelengths of light, like I showed you, that ours does. Then there's the high resolution RGB camera. That's kind of like a standard camera that you, like your iPhone, for example, where you would just, as if you were just pointing that down, only maybe a much higher resolution than the iPhone, just pointing that straight down, getting a visual look of the field. The multispectrals can do that as well. For example, you know, this one can do that as well. It's just not quite as high resolution as a standard RGB camera that you might buy out there. Now, then the third one that you get here is thermal. That's looking at the heat. And instead of looking at reflected light, that's basically looking at emitted radiation, emitted light, essentially, that is invisible to our eyes, but not so to snakes and other things. And so you can detect the heat coming off the ground, and it's very useful for water analysis, for looking at leaks and stuff like that, and identifying moist areas or cooler areas. So, with all that in mind, you want to make sure that, but what that gives you basically is different layers that you can add up together that tell you the whole story of what's going on with crops. It's like a book that you can read each page and you can learn something new about it. So for this to be useful, you kind of need it to be done in a timely manner. You need it when, you know, in the early growth stages, you need it during, you need it multiple times. It needs to be repeatable. You need to be able to fly over that field multiple times, capture data, and know and have confidence that it's calibrated, that you know that you're not looking at something that has smaller values just because it was brighter that day or because it was darker that day or something like that. You want to be able to be sure that it was calibrated, that you're looking at actual plant reflectance, that the plant's reflectance has gone down, that it is lower in chlorophyll, for example. So you want to be able to compare that over time. You want to be able to align all these different layers. All that's very important. So let me move on a little bit here and talk about our new sensor, just to kind of give you an example of how we've looked at this problem and what we've done. So it's this one here that I have in my hand. And what this has done is we've actually synchronized those three main data sets, those sensors, three main sensors that people use in their operations. So I talked about how people use multispectral imagery. Yes, it has that, and it's at twice the resolution of the previous sensor that we've made. And in addition to other sensors out there on the market, as well as it has the high resolution RGB built in, as well as thermal. So it's all three of those in one picture. So that was our purpose. What we've worked so hard on the past couple of years is to develop a sensor that combines those all in one. So, I know I talked about some of this a little bit, but it does have the 5 bands, the red, green, blue, the red edge, that near infrared. It's got a radiometric thermal that is calibrated, and that thermal sensor comes from FLIR, and they're the leaders in the industry when it comes to thermal. And so we've included their sensor on ours. And then it has a light sensor that's advanced that can look and know where the sun is. It can measure the sun's angle, which gives you a more accurate picture of the incoming light, the irradiance. And a number of other different features that make it easy to integrate. For example, it's just got common USB 3, which makes it fast and easy to integrate to a lot of different drones. And again, this kind of looks at the same wavelengths of light that I was showing you before. There's just some information there that I won't get into too deeply in this group, but I want to talk about the different integrations that we have for it, but I'll let Todd do that in a little bit here. What I really want to talk about is how this data is used and to give you a sense of what's going on here and tell you some more stories. Now, our goal with this wasn't just to create a sensor that incorporates all those 3 elements, the thermal, the RGB, and the multispectral, but we also wanted to make it an open ecosystem. A lot of times you'll find that sensor makers close things down and they say, well, if you use our sensor, then you have to use our software and you have to use this different thing, and you're kind of locked into one set of things. What we desire to do is to keep things open and let people choose the drone that they want to fly with, choose the software they want to use to process the data and look at the data. And really that just opens things up so that you can come up with answers on your own. And researchers love it because then they can use, the students can code up some solutions as well, and they're able to come up with their own software, essentially, to do things that they need to do. So that was one of our major goals. So let's take a look at how people can use Altom here. There's a lot of applications for this. So for one, you've got the high resolution RGB. So what does RGB do for you? What does flying from a height do for you? For one thing, you can easily identify, you know, large leaks, pools of water and things like that. But you can basically see your entire operation. You can see it from above. You have nice, crisp, clear photos that are high resolution. You can zoom in, you can get the detail, even from a height, even from 400 feet. You can compare things, you can see how things are going. It's visual, it's intuitive, it's what you're used to seeing. There are other cool aspects of putting the data together, and one of those is the DSM. Now the DSM stands for a digital surface model. This gives you, from the processing that you do, as you fly and you're collecting those overlapping images, what you're doing is you're actually creating a three-dimensional model of the ground, of what you're imaging. And when you process that, it outputs one of these. It outputs a DSM, and the DSM shows you the heights, it shows you the elevation, it shows you the lay of the land, it shows you the slope, it shows you the watershed, and you can segment objects based on this. So you can tell whether or not this is a tree or whether it's a bush or something like that. These are obviously much higher than these, so you can tell, you know, whether or not they're trees, for example. So there's a lot you can do there, and there's even a lot more than that, and which I'll get into in a little bit later. And then there's thermal. So thermal tells you the temperature of things. You can see that shadows are very cold, and vegetation is cool, as well as dirt gets very hot. The sun is beating down on the dirt gets very hot. And then you can also see roofs. You can do roof inspections and things like that. And anything that's facing the sun is going to be the warmest, for example. So thermal gives you a lot of information as well, and I'll talk about some specifics here. Another thing you can do is you can isolate the data that you receive to just the plants. So for example, we want to look at just the thermal data of the plant, so we can kind of isolate and chop things up and take a look at that. Because that's what we care about. We care about looking at those plants and not really looking at the dirt or anything like that. We don't really care at this point. So another thing you can do with the multispectral data, taking advantage of all the bands, is to look at the chlorophyll levels like I was talking about. So you can see areas that are higher in chlorophyll, and in this color scheme that we've chosen, the blue areas are very high in chlorophyll, whereas the red areas are very low, and then we've got the in-between layers are just sort of a yellowish blue. So we can see lots of very low chlorophyll areas in this particular example, and here low chlorophyll areas, whereas there's higher in the middle there. Just an example. Another way that the DSM can help, remember that the DSM is that three-dimensional model that we talked about, is that you've got your watershed, you've got your water flow. So right here is kind of a ditch that they dug, like a drainage ditch, and so we can fill this up virtually with water. So we fill that up with water, and we can see, you know, we can rise it, we can see where, you know, where the water is going to come out. We can see this is maybe not quite as thick as it needs to be when it's full of water. All sorts of things you can do. Here's another example. So we've got, here's the RGB image of our infrastructure here. So when we look at that in the thermal, we can see the differentiation here. And we can see, obviously, there's the shadows. We go back and forth between them. And I will show you some more cool thermal stuff in a little bit here. We use thermal in irrigation management. So if you want to validate your irrigation installations and see how things are doing, or maybe there's a leak, maybe there's an equipment failure, and a lot of water is pooling in one specific area, it's very easy to see in the thermal. I mean, here you can see what kind of system they've got. They've got something in the center, obviously, that's spraying, and most of that water is going right about here, and same thing here. They've got those 3 sprinklers there that are just kind of hitting one specific circle and not really doing much else. Now, I'm not sure how this looks on the screen. It's kind of dim from my view here. It's much, easier to visualize on my laptop, but. And you can see, yeah, you can see all sorts of leaks and things like that. And everything shows up. So here we're looking at, in a field irrigation context here, we can kind of see, you know, do we have any overspray? Are we getting the coverage that we thought we were? It's a good way to analyze that. And you can really see the coverage that you're getting there from these. Okay, so let's take a look at some more analytics here. So this is a vineyard. This is actually one that I flew in eastern Washington, in Prosser area. And I had the DJI M200, which is that one on the ground. And using the MicaSense Altom. I flew at about 120 meters. That's about 400 feet or so. And we ended up getting about 5 centimeters per pixel. So basically that means the image that you're looking at, each pixel in that image represents 5 centimeters on the ground. So it's pretty good coverage. So the first thing that we can look at here with this data is that we can actually do vine classification. We can classify what is a vine, what is soil, you know, what is vine, what is not, basically, even if there are cover crops in this case. So, and having that blue band, having all 5 of those bands together is actually key to how we classify things and how we get a good classification. So it's very important to have all those bands, and some sensors are actually missing the blue band, for example. Another thing we can look at is the chlorophyll in this area. Now, this is a research plot. This is through Washington State University. They were doing a lot of research on this plot, and they were testing different irrigation management practices. And so you can see that, you know, over here on this side, these rows are much lower in chlorophyll than some of the others. And you can actually see the differences that they're doing here. So this might be one test, that's another one, that's another one, that's another one. You can see exactly what's going on here and how things are working. Just from a bird's eye view, instantly you can tell what's working and what's not. So from their research, they're able to do that rather quickly. Okay, so let's take a look at this one specific region here. There's some plants with much higher chlorophyll content than the surrounding area here. So we're kind of curious about what's going on there and what's happening. So let's zoom in a little bit. So the blue areas there are vigorous. They have a high chlorophyll content. They're very healthy plants. The surrounding area, though, is all red. It's this low chlorophyll, less vigorous plants. Something's going on there. So it turns out, using the thermal band, we can detect leaks, and there's pools of water in certain areas here that are providing more water to those higher chlorophyll areas. And the difference here is quite small. It's just what we're talking about here is about 1 degree Celsius, which is about 2 degrees Fahrenheit or so. So it's not that much of a difference, but it stands out when you're looking at thermal. So when we look at the full resolution, we can see here darker, greener areas that are more vigorous, I guess, with more leaves and things like that. So we get the full context of everything we've seen to give us an answer about what's going on and something that we might not discover without scouting the entire field. Another thing we can do is actually, train models to find and extract vine rows, and we can classify their length. We can talk about the gaps and productivity and things like that as well. All of this is possible, as well as measurements. So what we've developed and what we are developing now is an approach that even works without a digital service model, but and even if there are cover crops there, we're still able to detect the vines, even if those cover crops are similar visually to the vines. Let's see here. I want to switch back. Actually, let's see. Yeah, okay, we can talk about this one. So again, in Chile here, We flew, or somebody flew a DJI M100 with the MicaSense Red Edge. They used software called Pix4D Capture to fly the mission. There's a number of different ways you can fly a mission like that. They did on-site processing with software called Pix4D Mapper, which processed all and stitched together all those images and created those map. And then they used our analytics software called Atlas to analyze the data and make analytical maps. And the area they were flying was a terrain like this, very low to very high. So very interesting terrain, definitely not flat. A lot of elevation change there. And it was a lot of acreage as well. You can see there, over 2,000 acres, 2,500 acres, with over 310,000 trees. So what we ended up doing is classifying these trees by size. All of these that you see here are actually little circles, little dots, and I'll show you that very soon. I've got a slide that zooms in there, but we analyze them not only for their size, but we analyze their chlorophyll content and for their canopy closure. So canopy closure like this, where it's really closed and it's less, less spacing, that can cause problems for counting trees for one thing, and we can see now where trees need to be pruned. It's kind of obvious from the visual imagery as well. But here we've got them classified by their size here, so we can see individual trees and how large they are. We have a bunch of smaller trees in here. We have a large tree here, a very large tree here. We can kind of identify how many trees there are still and count them. And yeah, so there's another option there. Okay. So before I go on, I just want to switch back here and talk back to the process here. And once again, I want to remind you about the process, and then maybe we can show more case studies and stuff like that in a little bit. But the basic idea, integrating the camera onto the aircraft, and I'm going to have Todd step up and talk for a little bit, collecting overlapping images of the area of interest, processing all of those images into a reflectance map that you can look at. You can look at all the different layers of the map, and then analyzing that data and making decisions. So the first step in this, integration. I'll hand the mic. Todd, you can take over and talk about integrating things. Yeah, it does. Should work.
Okay. All right. That one works. So I'm Todd. I'm from Blue Skies Drone Rental. We got a shop down in Bothell, down by Canyon Park area, and we're a dealer. So we sell and we rent and we train people, and we also perform aerial services. We perform repair service as well on everything that Rob has talked about. We carry the drones as well as the sensors, so there's a lot of different types of sensors that you can use. Rob has talked specifically about the agriculture. We carry the agriculture stuff, but then we carry everything else for all the other industries, such as public safety, construction, survey, what have you. There's a lot of different applications for drones, and it all depends on choosing a platform and choosing a gizmo or a gadget or sensor that goes underneath that collects the data that you want to see. And so for this in this case specifically, Rob talked about the Red Edge sensor and the Altom sensor. Those will both mount on either of these two drones. There's other options as well, but I kind of brought a little smattering here. This is a little one that would be used more for training and scouting. If you just want to go get a quick look at your crops or what's going on without doing too much, spending too much time on it. If you think you might be able to see what you want to see with just like the visual camera, like you said, it's almost like putting your iPhone on that drone and just go look around and see if you can see anything with a quick look. That's a really great unit to do that with. And then if you need to carry a heavier sensor, then you start thinking about something else like this. I used to be a Boeing engineer, and what they as you well know, 4 engines on a 747 plane, right? And all the industry wanted 4 engines, and they said, we need 4 engines for safety. Boeing took a different route, went 2 engines on the 777 in the 90s, and totally changed the industry because they said, no, we can be safe, we can do everything we need to do with 2 engines. And they proved the industry that they could do that, and now the new standard is 2 engines on a lot of commercial aircraft. So by analogy, you only take as much drone as you need to do what you want to do. So first you need to decide what type of data do I want to collect, and then what sensor do I need to carry to collect that data. Now what's the minimum drone that I can use to collect that data? There's also some other considerations, of course. So why would I go from here? This is a quadcopter. Takes off vertical and lands vertical, obviously, just like a helicopter. It's got a 3 to 5 pound payload. This one has about the same payload. So going with that analogy, if I can carry that sensor on this one or this one, this one's kind of the $8,000 range, and this is the $15,000 to $20,000 range, why would I go with this one? So there's some other variables. Flight time. There you go. So you throw flight time into the mix, then maybe I do want this one. But if I'm only surveying 10 acres, then this is kind of overkill. If I'm surveying 100 to 1,000 acres, then if I'm surveying 100 to 1,000 acres, then this guy becomes more viable. But if I'm 100 acres or below, then this guy works pretty good. This is 20-minute flight time, and this is around an hour flight time. And this one's going to fly at around 30 miles an hour, and this one's going to fly around 20 miles an hour. So there's those variables to think of as well. And I think the biggest thing, if you do look at getting into drone agriculture, the choice you need to make first off is, do I want to start training myself to start capturing this imagery? And do I want to hire a service provider to do that? We're a service provider. There's many others out there that have this type of equipment. So that's kind of your first choice, is what do I want to do there? And then if you do decide that you want to start capturing this imagery yourself, like Rob mentioned, it's important to capture it frequently, because if you just get one snapshot, then you can't really compare that to other points in time, and so you might not have the accurate picture. So if you're really going to do it and do it right, then you might want to capture it at different points throughout the season to compare how your plants are doing, and like you said, with different application amounts and different fertilizer amounts, different things that you're doing, you'll see that over time. So then if you decide you want to have the equipment on hand and do it yourself, then it's, well, do I buy or do I rent? And we do both. That way you can choose what you want. If you're going to do it intermittently, then it might make sense to rent. If you're going to do it all the time, then it might make sense to buy. Just depends on how big your fields are and how much you want to see, how much you want to get into the details. This one here, it will actually do a vertical takeoff and land. So some of you came by the booth and I showed you this, but once it takes off, then including the tail motor, all 3 motors will flip down, and this transitions to forward flight. Doesn't have the wings on here, obviously. I took those off because this is a small table and I didn't want to risk bumping those and tipping the thing over. It's meant to fly, it's not meant to fall on the ground. So once it gets in the air, it's going to do that, and then once you get back, it's going to transition like this and do that. So flight planning is a big thing. With this drone, you can fly it completely manually, or you can fly it automated. This one as well, you can fly manually or automated. This one is going to be an automated flight plan. You're going to plan it all on a computer before you get to the field, and then you hit go, and the thing takes off and goes and does its mission. It's going to do a grid pattern back and forth, and then it's going to come back, and the only manual part of it is going to come back and hover over you and wait for you to land it, and then you're just going to land it just like you land one of these. And so if you do decide to get into it, there's a progression. You wouldn't just start with this one. you might want to start with something like this. Train yourself, get your skills honed, get your reflexes good so that you know how to fly that, because that's going to come in handy if you decide you want to fly this, or if you want to fly this. They all kind of use some of those same methodologies. And so you usually want to start with the lowest model. If you're going to make mistakes, you make mistakes on that one. Train yourself up and get everything good and going. The other thing I wanted to show you was Rob mentioned the ability to capture multiple imagery in one flight. That's critical, especially if you got large fields. You bought this, or maybe you rent, or maybe you're paying somebody to fly this big unit over very large fields. Then you don't want him flying it twice or 3 times. You'd rather just have it once and done and be over with. And so this is the payload bay. This one's outfitted up with a multispectral and an RGB camera. It can be outfitted up with the Red Edge or the Altom to go in here, and then you've got one aircraft, and you can just swap payload bays depending on what you want to do. This one as well. This one serves agriculture very well. This one is kind of an all-around machine. This one will do. You can mount the Red Edge sensor or the Altom. You can also mount thermal or high zoom. There's a lot of police units that are picking up these actually to do standoff surveillance for high threat situations, other things like that. So did I kind of hit all the points you wanted to hear? So if you guys want, I can demonstrate flying these two over here. I'm just going to hover them, not do too much with them, but just give you an idea for how stable and controllable they are. They're not like your kids' toys that you've got. If any of you have gotten one of those toys from Costco or somewhere else, the little ones, sometimes you fly them around and all of a sudden they just whack out and they go different places and they go crazy and crash into the wall, and you're like, why would I buy an expensive machine that acts like that? Well, the thing is these are GPS stabilized, and they're also attitude stabilized. So attitude stabilization means it's got a inertial measurement unit inside the drone that keeps it from doing this without you telling it to. It keeps it solid like this so it doesn't go anywhere.
Wish people were attitude stabilized.
There you go. Nice. The GPS stabilization holds its position, so it's going to keep it from going like this. Now you might ask, well, do we get GPS signal in here, indoors? No, not really. So when you lose GPS stabilization, the drone tends to wander back and forth. These drones actually have some vision position sensors on them that see the ground and see the walls, and so they use that in lieu of the GPS signal to do a position hold. Anyways, does anybody have any questions on those before I just run them up and give you a little demo?
So, yes, you said that one goes quite a bit slower than the fixed wing.
Yes.
So, is there a difference in the imagery for one going slower, one going faster,
So you'd want to tune them to the camera. If this one's going a little bit fast for the imagery, then you can slow it down a little bit and make sure that you get the imagery that you're looking for.
And I can say with our sensors that they have a global shutter, which just means that the shutter is kind of always open, and they just take a picture at that moment. So there's nothing, like normally the kind of things you would see is a rolling shutter, like your iPhone has a rolling shutter, which means the shutter is rolling, and so it covers up part of the image. So rather than taking it all at once, and you see some of those artifacts, that means that the image looks kind of wavy if you're going too fast, or if you are shaking your iPhone or something, you take a picture, you'll see wavy artifacts or distortion. And with our sensors, because they're global shutters, every pixel is captured at the same time. So.
And so the speed doesn't as much matter if you've got that global shutter.
How economical is this for, like, if you're a farmer and you want to hire someone to do the imagery for you? How much would that cost to do the capacity?
Yeah. So it's a good question. 1,000 acres, it might be economical. $5 an acre might be a ballpark for a service for that. $5 an acre, just yeah. Hey, just a good ballpark. I mean, those quotes would vary depending on the equipment that the operator has. Because the other thing to consider is you mentioned flight time, but time in the field. So if you've got a lot of acreage, then this is going to seriously decrease your time in the field and maybe justify the investment there. This one, you're going to spend more time landing and changing out batteries, and so your time in the field and then your mobilization to move spots might affect that number as well. So it can vary.
That's like rather than scouting the whole field, you could do a targeted scout just by what you see in the maps and say, let's go to this specific area right here, rather than sending people through 1,000 acres or so.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah. Do you have any specific examples of those, Rob?
Well, the one I gave earlier was that cherry orchard where they didn't have to, apply fertilizer again or herbicide again to the weeds. That's just an example of, saving on herbicide costs and things like that. Finding leaks early can save you on water costs and things like that. And oh, sure, yeah. So what's the ROI basically on hiring a service provider to do this? And then I don't have anything to share here right now, specifically like that, no.
I'd say a lot of that might depend on what the level of crop is and how high value that crop is, and whether or not losing a lot of that costs a lot. But yeah, as far as the numbers, that's one thing that's been on my mind as well, is putting together some sort of concrete numbers that can show that. But you can imagine up the water loss, the crop loss, the overuse of fertilizer, or the underuse of pesticide, whatever else to get your yield that you want to get. And if you're killing it with fertilizer, then there's an optimization problem that you might be able to use this imagery to scale back your fertilizer usage very slowly, and then say, wow, look at that. This is good enough. This is going to be great, and we're saving X on fertilizer usage.
This might be more of a science question, but you can see the chlorophyll levels in plants. My question is, like for cover crops where you want to know like the protein and the yield, are you able to somehow know that, like their protein level at that point in time?
Throw that one to you, Rob.
We're not really, I don't think we're able to get at the protein levels. I'm not sure about that. Yeah, basically we're looking at visual symptoms, really. Anything that would be visible, we could detect. With chlorophyll, is visible because, they change color. They just do. It's just nature. So that's kind of what we're looking at. The main benefit is that you can see it before it happens, to us, like before we see it. So.
Yeah. One other thing I mentioned that this was a vertical takeoff and land aircraft, which I really like because we've flown some of the other fixed wings that do like a belly landing, and you got to have a really big area, but you have a field, and so you can land there, but then you've got this drone coming down and doing a belly landing on top of your crops or something, which may or may not be desirable, and then also that drone gets damaged a little bit as it might flop through there, just depending on how it goes. But this one takes all the advantages of this guy. And all the advantages of a fixed wing and puts it in one. You get the endurance and the flight time of a fixed wing, but with the vertical takeoff and land capability of a quadcopter. So, any other questions?
And I just wanted to point out along those lines, I pulled this up because of talking about ROI a little bit, but So this map was flown somewhere in Pendleton, Oregon, and you see that everything's looking green and good. There's a really healthy patch of green area surrounded by less weaker. This is a potato pivot, 80 acres. And so people looking at this map said, okay, well, that's healthy potatoes surrounded by a patch of less healthy potatoes. It turns out, though, that whole area is just nothing but weeds. And so that section there is really, really healthy weeds, and then the section around it is, not, so they're all healthy weeds, but the section that's showing a lot higher NDVI is actually broadleaf weeds, which reflect a lot more light, and then the section surrounded it is like grass leaf, which don't reflect as much light upwards. So, you know, this could fool everybody. If you don't really know what you're looking at here, you could say, okay, well, I've got a really healthy patch here and a less healthy patch here, and it's all potatoes and everything's good. No, everything there is weeds. So detecting this stuff is not often as easy as it looks, and getting to that, and getting to these things, and understanding what these layers do is a huge part of getting answers about your crops. And I don't know why this image is not loading up, but there's little spots you can see of moisture and water moisture that show up really well. But anyway, it looks like you got a drone ready to go there. Let's see some cool, see a drone taking off here.
This is a little scout drone. If I take my hands off, it just sits there.
Hands free, staying in one place.
If you're a beginner and you get lost and not sure what you're doing, you just take your thumbs off and it just sits there and waits for you to know what to do. These do have obstacle avoidance systems that shouldn't totally be relied on, but it won't let you move it towards the wall as long as that obstacle avoidance is working. It'll see that.
Let's not test that theory.
You can see this one's moving around a lot more because it's close to the ground and the walls, and it's throwing around a lot of wind that creates those currents. But if you're out in the open, you're not going to see that variability so much. But all that said, a lot of people use these for bridge inspections and different other things. If you get the thing close to a wall, those currents are hitting the wall, and it wants to kind of suck the drone towards the wall like a vacuum. And so you just don't want to get close to those and think, hey, the obstacle avoidance is going to protect me, because then you got that sucking motion where it goes. Just give you an idea of the drone. This is 1,000. Yeah. A lot of this one's even used for hobby and travel and everything like that. But this one crosses the border between commercial and consumer use.
And there are lots of other options as well for drones that, for example, that you can put our sensors on. Like you could put it on a DJI Inspire 1 or Matrice 100, which are significantly lower costs. And I think these guys rent them out as well. Inspire 2, Inspire 1, Matrice 100, Matrice 600, all DJI drones. And you know, these guys set them up so that our sensors fit on there, so you don't have to think about stuff like that, as well as we sell integration kits that allow you to integrate the sensors pretty easily onto different kinds of drones, especially DJI drones, because they're just so popular. But you know, when it comes to like putting stuff on a fixed wing, you definitely want an integrator to do that for you. That can be tougher, things like that. But so are there any other questions about any of this at all, or anything, questions that you had coming in that maybe, I don't know?
I wanted to ask about the analysis of the data.
Yeah.
Is it pretty instant, or like, is it something that somebody has to manually go through it, process it all, or how does that work?
So it works like this. Essentially, there are a number of different software applications that can process and stitch the maps together, and some of those also create analytical layers as well. So like if you were to use software called Pix4D Mapper, it will take all of those images you give it, it'll stitch them all together into one map. It'll also create like an NDVI layer, it'll create an NDRE. These are different agricultural indices that show you different things, like chlorophyll content or leaf area. Like NDVI is, have you guys ever heard, who's heard the term NDVI? Okay, so NDVI is probably the most popular index. Farmers have been using it from satellite data for years and years and years, getting it from satellite data. And so the idea initially in precision agriculture was that, hey, drones can do this too. The drones can give you NDVI, but so that's one thing. But the NDVI, like I showed here, only gives you a little bit of the story. You know, like in that case, NDVI was high, and you might think, okay, things are good, things are healthy there, but those weren't even potatoes at all. So it just is showing you, NDVI is just something that shows you the leaf area, how much leaf area is there. Just because of that model of plant reflectance that I was showing earlier. This thing, well, it's not there, but there, that thing. That NDVI is taking of that, and it's just simple math. But anyway, so Pix4D Mapper can create that, and it can create NDRE and show you chlorophyll, it can show you lots of other things. And it's just maps that are automatically generated at the end of processing. Then there's software that's free. There's one called QGIS, QGIS, which you can go in there, and it's got this, if you know what you're doing, it's got this thing called a raster calculator, and you can punch in the formula that you want, and it'll apply that to your map. And you can create all sorts of analytical layers and do it all for free. And a lot of students are using that just because it's open source and it's free to use. But for that, you have to kind of go and look online and find formulas, agricultural indices and things like that. And other things called color composites where you just rearrange the bands. Because your monitor, this monitor only shows you red, green, and blue light, but you can take, so for example, we give you 5 bands. We don't just give you red, green, and blue. So normally red is shown through the red band, green through the green, and blue is shown as blue, but you can make it so that near infrared is shown as red on your screen. And that, you know, you can change the colors, you can flip things around, and it shows you different stuff. In fact, that was one of the things I wanted to show as well, was that color composite here. Let's see here. This stuff. So this is a color composite. This is actually using near infrared as red. Red is being shown as green, and green is being shown as blue. But it sounds weird, but what that does is it actually shows you moisture, and it shows you where problems are, for example. So the wetter soil is like a darker blue. Plants show up as kind of a purplish red, and the dry soil shows up as like a cyan, kind of lighter blue. So yeah, you can do all sorts of stuff by yourself on your own, or you can use these pre-existing things. We have this analytic software that you can upload your stuff to, and we'll create a bunch of layers for you as well. That is on the cloud, so you can have your data on the cloud. You can see all these different layers, turn them on and off. They're all synced together, so you can kind of like, I would turn on this layer and turn it off and see the visible, or turn on the NDVI and compare everything all at once. There's a number of different applications out there that'll do that for you right away, automatically. Maybe that answer was too long for what you're saying, but hopefully that does the trick. What other kind of questions do we have here? Yeah. It's different for every one of them, but you know, the most popular one I would say is Pix4D, and they do a monthly rental for like 150 bucks a month. They do a yearly rental. I think it's around 1,000 or so, and they do a perpetual license as well, which I don't remember the cost of that, but one that you can just keep forever. But yeah, you can do it monthly, so if you're just using it during the season and then you don't use it during the off season, then it was just 150 bucks or whatever, and it'll be 150 bucks again next year, you know, or however much it is, however many months you use it. There's all sorts of different pricing plans. There's quite a few different processors out there. Yeah.
Okay, so you guys are talking about doing all of this, doohickeys up on a drone.
Yeah.
But if you're going to hire someone out to spray, let's say, your ground,
Uh-huh.
and you were going to spray the helicopter, would that
People use it for like targeted spraying. Right now in China especially, they are creating these maps, and they're making prescription maps to spray only certain areas. And they actually have this drone that does the spraying. I think it's unlikely to happen here on some of the large acreage because it's just the drone they're flying with can only do so much, cover so many acres. But if you're talking about thousands of acres, suddenly, you know, it doesn't make sense. It makes more sense to just cover it and whatever. But yeah, that's one. It is something you could do, and you could use it to create prescriptions. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
All of these platforms don't need internet, if that's what you're asking. Um, the drones and the sensors, everything, you can fly them in the middle of nowhere. Even the middle of nowhere has GPS signal, so these drones fly on GPS signal, not on Wi-Fi or internet or cell signal. They don't need any of that.
Yeah, and the analytics as well, the processing software that you get just works offline. There are some cloud solutions which you have to have a connection for, but you know, for example, Pix40, one that I just mentioned, is an offline thing. They have this thing called Pix40 Fields, which processes it within like 10 minutes or so. So you fly, and then while you're still out in the field, you could actually have that thing processing, and you know, 5-10 minutes later, you have your map there to look at what's going on. Yeah, I actually have Pix40 fields on my machine here because I did some of these flights. I can show you a little example of what that looks like. Probably won't process something here now, but like, let's see here. Let's just grab this one. I'm not sure what the status is or if I even processed anything. But yeah, it's pretty cool because it does it so fast. I mean, just while you're there in the field, you can get a sense like, did I capture everything I needed to capture? You can even get a quick look and see where to look in the field. So, any other questions? Not sure why that's taken a while to load, but always during a demonstration. This was unplanned, I don't know, just my computer's being weird anyway, so. What other kinds of questions we got, yeah?
So, with the speed that things are changing, if you buy something now, how long is it going to be till realistically the lifespan of something?
So people are still flying with our original Red Edge cameras and posting about it, tweeting about it, and they're really happy with them. And they don't really need more than that. So that came out in 2014. So like 4 years, I guess. They're still. Yeah. Well, no, I think 2016 we came out with the next one, and then 2017 came out with another, and yeah, 2018 Altom. So maybe a year to 2 years before we have something new. I don't know. That was the way it worked this time around.
The drones, it's like 6 months to a year on some of them. But I don't remember who I talked to, but I was explaining like a computer. It's kind of like buying a computer. You might buy a computer and it might work well for you for 5 or 10 years. It might not be the latest state of the art, even though something else is coming out new every year. But it might do just fine for you until you decide to replace it. So.
Totally. Yeah, and we make these here in the USA. So we have full control over, I mean, everything. It's done in Seattle. It's done in Ballard. Our offices are in Fremont. Our manufacturer is in Ballard. We make it here. So we have full control over the quality, and it lasts. So we're very, very proud of that. And here's just what I have up here from Pix4D Fields. It created all this stuff for me, NDVI map here, so we can see areas of high leaf area, high leaf content. So obviously you see little trees here, and low leaf content would be like soil and stuff like that, obviously. And there's other things that they give us to help analyze, as well as the surface model. In this case, it's a very basic surface model, but you can see the lay of the land. You can see how the water might flow. The purplish areas there, the blue and purple are low, and the red is very high. And you can see the differences just from 344 meters to 360 meters. Not much of a difference. Kind of looks more dramatic in the colors, but yeah. There's an example of what you get in like 10 minutes or so. And this is a full vineyard. I think that's, actually no, this is not a vineyard. This is apple trees, apple and cherry trees. I think that area is probably about 20 acres or so, not too big. So cool. Any questions? Well, if you guys want to come up and check out some of these drones or these sensors, if you want to hold them in your hands or anything like that, you're welcome to do that. I'll stick around for a while. I'm sure Todd will stick around too. And you know, we're at micasense.com. My name's Robert, and we're happy to have you come and talk to us anytime. You can reach me at robert@micasense.com if you want to send me an email, and yeah, we'd be happy to hear from you. So thanks for coming, guys.